warm welcome to all of you, lovers of New York City and literature, who are gathered today to honor and celebrate the life and the work of Oscar Hijuelos, the first Latino to win a Pulitzer Prize in Literature. I'm Barbaralee Diamonstein-Spielvogel, Chair of the Historic Landmarks Preservation Center and the New York City Landmarks 50 Alliance, a committee of distinguished and dedicated individuals and organizations, 126 organizations to date and still growing, committed to informing the public about the past, present, and future of historic preservation in our city. Our thanks go to Columbia University, who not only assisted with the approvals in the installation, expedited it. We thank you. And especially to his wife, Lori Carlson Hijuelos. The son of Cuban immigrants, Oscar Hijuelos was born in 1951 and lived here until he was 20. It was at this address that he began to write and play the guitar and the piano, and this love of music, along with his love of literature, remained a potent force in his life and his work. The recipient of the Rome Prize for his first novel, Our House in the Last World, published in 1983, it was his second novel, a vivid exploration of his parents' era, the Mambo Kings, that catapulted him into international recognition, first as a spellbinding novel, and then when it was made into a widely admired film in 1992. It is particularly appropriate that we are installing this cultural medallion here, where he lived. In a New York Times essay, Hijuelos recalls his childhood years poignantly, describing his early separation from his family due to illness and the resultant estrangement from his first language. He says, as the years passed, he began to look through another window, not out onto 118th Street, where we are now, but into himself, through his writing, the process by which he finally returned home. And now, before we begin our program of distinguished speakers, Maria Ramirez, an educator from nearby PS 145, will read a blessing in Spanish and then translate it to English. Maria Ramirez.
De la carta del apóstol San Pablo a los romanos. Mientras vivimos, vivimos para complacer al Señor, y cuando morimos, nos vamos para estar con el Señor. Así es que en la vida y en la muerte somos del Señor. While we live to please the Lord, and when we die, we go to be with the Lord. So in life and in death, we belong to the Lord.
Lori Marie Carlson was born in Jamestown, New York. She is an author and editor of 10 books, has a master's degree in Hispanic literature from Indiana University in Bloomington. For over a decade, she worked at the Americas Society, first as deputy director and then as director of literature. In the 1990s, she began to write full-time. Her work now focuses on two areas, editing and translating for young adults, and in her own writing, an exploration of women's roles in society. She has taught at several universities, most recently Duke University. Lori Marie Carlson.
My profound gratitude today to Barbaralee Diamonstein-Spielvogel, chair of the Historic Landmarks Preservation Center, and her colleagues, and to the distinguished speakers here today, and to all of you who have taken time to come to this tribute, especially my dear nephew, Matthew Hijuelos, Richard Mullertime, my husband Oscar's oldest friend, and a special guest who is visiting from France, Alain Marciano. My husband would have been astonished to know that he was appreciated this much by his beloved New York City. I can almost hear him saying to me, "Really, Popsy? All this for me?" Oscar was an unpretentious, inquisitive, shy, tender-hearted man born into an immigrant household of scant means. But what his Cuban family did not have in capital was offset by cultural wealth. It was in this building, 419 West 118, that Oscar came to understand his inheritance and where he initially engaged with Cubania. The dancing, food, humor, suffering, spirituality, poetry, religiosity, nostalgia, mambo and sazon that would ultimately give shape to his worldview and his singular artistry. His flamboyant mother, Magdalena de la Luz, or Magdalene of the Light, lived in the building until the day she died in 1994 at 91 years of age. Oscar and I spent many a Sunday evening here in the family's first floor railroad apartment, eating her specialty, chicken fricassee and fried plantains. It was also in this apartment building where Oscar began to write stories and play music. Childhood illness kept him in his bedroom a lot. In his teens, that space would take on greater significance. He painted the walls bright red and surrounded himself with guitars and records, comics, and carefully selected lead soldiers. He made a world out of that small room. Recently, while going through some of Oscar's papers, I came upon a notebook in which he had jotted down several responses to a question posed at a conference we attended in Santa Fe, hosted by Jeff Bezos in New Mexico a few years ago. The question was, what has greatest meaning for you? List 10 things. On Oscar's list, the first two items were my surname, Hijuelos, and Spain. It was this neighborhood of Morningside Heights with its intense multicultural diversity in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s that nurtured his intense pride in being Cuban American, speaking the Spanish language and celebrating Latin American flair. And it is this neighborhood surrounding Columbia University that roots his literary work. Today you will hear from several of Oscar's friends, among them Bill Schinker, who published Oscar's memoir, Thoughts Without Cigarettes. I would like to share a little story that did not find its way into a book. It is a tale that Oscar told me in the early days of our courtship. I will be brief. He was sitting on a chair looking out from that very window and noticed that there was a big piano, a grand piano, sitting on the sidewalk. Oscar desperately wanted to learn how to play piano, but the family was too poor to buy one. So for a few days, he kept staring out at the piano to see, in his very polite way, if someone would claim it. And when he was certain that it was there to be carted away, he decided to take his move. He came out all by himself, rolled it up this little area, got it into the foyer, but couldn't find a way to get it through the door. He kept trying, and finally he decided, well, he'd take it apart. So he found a saw and a hammer and hacked away at that piano. And finally, after a full day's work, he had it. He brought it in piece by piece, reconstructed it in his room. I don't know how he fit it in there. It must have been a quite different looking piano, and taught himself to play. That was Oscar, determined, passionate, creative, my love.
Schinker, as you've already heard, was a distinguished bookseller and trade book publisher with a 40-year career, beginning as a clerk in an independent bookstore. He founded Gotham Books in New York City, part of the Penguin Group, in September 2001, and served as president and publisher there until 2 months ago. Prior to Gotham, he was the president and founding publisher of Broadway Books, a division of Random House, and he has held significant positions at HarperCollins, Warner Books, and Avon Books, then a division of the Hearst Corporation. Like our other publisher today, he has worked with many authors, including, of course, Oscar Hijuelos is the publisher of his memoir, William Schinker.
Thank you, Barbaralee. It is an honor for me to be here at this wonderful occasion in memory of my author and close friend, Oscar Hijuelos. I published a number of Oscar's brilliant books at 2 different houses. While I was the publisher of HarperCollins, I proudly published The Mambo Kings Play Songs of Love in paperback in the Harper Perennial imprint after it had won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1989. It went on to be a huge bestseller in paperback, much to Oscar's and my great delight. While at HarperCollins, I also published the hardcover and paperback editions of The 14 Sisters of Emilio Montez O'Brien and Mr. Ives' Christmas. More recently, as Barbara just mentioned, in 2011 at Gotham Books, an imprint of Penguin Random House, I published Oscar's moving, very revealing, and critically acclaimed memoir, Thoughts Without Cigarettes. I got to know Oscar first as a writer, but we formed a strong bond, and over the years, we became real buddies. Having published Oscar and having heard him tell stories about his life, it is wonderful to finally be here at his boyhood home. As all of you know, this building played a major role in Mambo Kings, and Oscar's memoir, Thoughts Without Cigarettes, begins right on this very stoop. Oscar wrote about the building and the apartment he grew up in, lovingly and vividly in that book. In Cigarettes, Oscar revisited the people and experiences whose confluence created his celebrated work, The Mambo Kings. And in his memoir, Oscar wrote that his life did not begin propitiously. He was the son, as you've been told, of Cuban immigrants, Pascual and Magdalena Hijuelos. He developed a debilitating case of nephritis after a boyhood visit to Havana with his mother and his brother Jose. After a year in a convalescent hospital in Connecticut, he was finally able to return home to this very building where his mother, a complex figure whose Oscar spent decades trying to understand, protected him ferociously. In Cigarettes, Oscar recalls an ambivalence about the Spanish language. He could comprehend it completely, but he refrained from speaking it throughout his boyhood. And in his memoir, Oscar celebrates his beloved father, notably in the book's dazzling final paragraph. The man that I knew had an unquenchable zest for life that came through in all of his writing. Oscar had a big, big heart, and it shone in all he wrote and all he did. He attacked everything he undertook with a great deal of energy, whether it was writing a book or promoting a book. Oscar was, of course, a beautiful writer and a brilliant storyteller. At HarperCollins, Oscar's editor was Robert Jones, and they developed a very special bond as they worked together on Oscar's novels. Robert, who started his career as my assistant, loved working with Oscar to shape and perfect his books. Oscar's seemingly bottomless well of energy was evident every summer at Oscar and Lori's beloved Killam's Point in Brantford, Connecticut, near the house my wife Susan Muldau and I have on the shore nearby in Guilford, Connecticut. Oscar never tired of playing tennis with his neighbors or swimming for hours in Long Island Sound. The latter was not an activity many practiced, but Oscar reveled in it. Oscar was very, very funny and witty in an antic and animated way. He was literally the life of the party wherever he went, and people absolutely loved to be with him. The Oscar I knew was also a very humble man. No matter how famous he became all over the world, he never forgot where he came from. Although he was a figure on the New York City literary scene, although he worked on his books at Yaddo and the American Academy in Rome, although he and Laurie lived on Riverside Drive, and although he was on the English faculty at Duke, Oscar did not feel himself a part of the literary establishment of New York City. And that's why this honor is so wonderful. He was always the boy from 418 West 118th Street in Morningside Heights. It is fitting that he is receiving this wonderful cultural medallion at his boyhood home from New York City's Landmark 50 Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Jonathan Talese, President and Publisher of Farrar, Straus and Giroux, began his publishing career at Houghton Mifflin in Boston. He moved to Random House in New York, and after being fired from Random House, moved to Farrar, Straus and Giroux as executive editor in 1985, and his brilliant career speaks to these long years of hard work. 2 years later, he was named editor-in-chief, and the rest, as they say, is history. An accomplished translator of poetry, he has published poems in journals such as Threepenny Review, The New Yorker, and The Nation, and was the recipient of a 1989 Guggenheim Fellowship for Poetry. Poetry editor for the Paris Review for 10 years. He is also an honorary chairman of the Academy of American Poets, enjoying a wonderful April, and perhaps he will talk to us in verse. Jonathan Talese.
I won't talk to you in person. Thank you, Barbaralee. It's really such an honor to be here to talk about Oscar. I didn't see him in this location, but I used to see him on 106th Street in his apartment, which was another phase of his life, but before the Riverside Drive phase. We worked together on two books, The Mambo Kings Play Songs of Love and The 14 Sisters of Emilio Montes O'Brien. And watching the Mambo Kings come into life was a very exciting and moving experience for me. What Bill said about Oscar is very true. He was a very humble person and very gifted, also very proud, and very eager to be loved, I think. And he had tremendous warmth and generosity, and he was easily hurt too, I think. He was a very sensitive person, and Bill alluded to the sense that he never really felt that he was part of the literary establishment. I don't know what the literary establishment really is, but maybe all of us feel we're not really quite part of it. But what Oscar did was open up American fiction in a way that was radical and changed things for a lot of people. The Mambo Kings became a very popular book. It became a movie. It was going to be a musical at one point. But apart from the sexiness and joy of it, there was tremendous poignancy to it. And Beautiful Maria of My Soul is something that anyone who has come in touch with that song that's at the heart of the book we'll never forget. I think Oscar was at the vanguard of a kind of democratization, you could say, of American fiction, and he was a tremendously gifted artist that let him that gift, that art, let him brought other people into his world in a way that was unique. He died way too young. It's really shocking and sad that he's not here with us. But I'm very happy. I can't wait to see the plaque. I think it's a marvelous thing. Thank you for doing it.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Gogh Talese. He was a reporter for nearly a decade at the Times from 1956 to 1965. Since then, I'm sure many of you have read his works in the Times, Esquire, The New Yorker, Harper's Magazine, and many other national publications. While he seems like the quintessential New Yorker, he was born in Ocean City, New Jersey, but has lived in New York City all of his adult life. His groundbreaking article was Frank Sinatra Has a Cold. It was named the best story Esquire ever published, and he was credited by Tom Wolfe with the creation of an inventive form of journalism writing called, nonfiction writing, called the New Journalism. His most recent book, A Writer's Life, was published by Knopf in 2006 and reissued in trade paperback by Random House in July 2007. A collection of his sports writing, The Silent Season of a Hero, was published in 2010. He is currently at work, no doubt, on numerous articles and probably several books. It is a great pleasure I introduce Gogh Talese.
Thank you, Barbaralee. You wouldn't assume it on this occasion, honoring the memory of Oscar Hijuelos, but most writers are hard to like, and even more so, hard to know. If they are writers of fiction or writers of anything, as you know, they're solitary people. They work behind closed doors and they communicate by putting words on paper. If you want to know about them, they sometimes tell you, read my work. Well, if they're writers of fiction, they also tell you that I made it up. I'm a creative person. I wasn't writing about myself. I was writing about the imaginary individuals that invigorate my soul. Or if they're nonfiction writers, they will most likely not have written about themselves. They write about well-known people. They write about celebrities. They write about presidents and generals and public figures that you know. If the writers are miserably married and have time in their hands at night, you can get to know them, but most likely you get to know them in saloons or places where people such as writers assemble, solitary people during the day and at night, loose on the town, looking for leisure, looking for escape. Such a place for a long time was Elaine's restaurant. And as a frequenter of Elaine's, I met many writers. I met Mailer and Styron and Capote and Gore Vidal, many famous people. But when you're meeting people at night in such places as Elaine's or other similar renowned watering holes for the literary set, you're meeting them around drinks, and you're really getting to know them through the haze of alcohol. And if you are a happily married person, and I know some who are writers, you're going to be finding their spouse, it could be a woman or man, not wanting them to go to watering holes and not wanting them to waste their talent at night talking to people rather than devoting themselves fully on either their work or their relationship within the marriage. I had for the longest time, My best friend was my cousin, Nick Pileggi. We knew one another as boys and grew to live with one another when I was a reporter in the Times and he was reporting the Associated Press. And he was miserably married, and I saw a lot of him, at Elaine's and other places. He had a lot of time. But then he married a second woman who he adored, Nora Ephron. And she so absorbed him in her life and in her public life, in her celebrity life at night, so that she took him into her social sphere. And I was not part of her social sphere. So I lost my friend to Nora Ephron, this loving wife that he had and still adores. I had another friend who was happily married, and his wife liked me. This was David Halberstam, best friend for years and years. And his, he not only saw him at night, he didn't drink, but we had a lot of time together at dinner. I saw him the daytime, would take walks. I had the most loving brotherly relationship with Halberstam. But he was also very competitive. So competitive that one time in 1980, I had an idea for a book I was working on, and he just belatedly had an idea for a book that's very much like that. And we suddenly became competitive. As a result, it terminated our friendship. You wouldn't believe it, but it would, because sometimes writers are competitive, very competitive. We didn't talk for 13 years. Finally, we made up, and fortunately for me, we did, because not long after that, he died in an automobile accident. But it's with this conflicted view of writers that I went as a panelist to the Sundance Festival. And among the people I met was a young man named Oscar Hijuelos. He told me he was Cuban, but he didn't look Cuban to me. He looked like he was a Viennese butcher. Or he looked like a divinity student from Oxford or somewhere. But I'm Italian and he was Cuban, he told me, and we kind of bonded a little bit as ethnics in that literary world that was alluded to as sometimes a basket of crabs or very selective and very elitist. We met, and he said he lived in New York. I live in New York, I said. Oh, we'll see one another. And I thought, well, fat chance. I mean, he'll go back to New York and become like the rest, devote himself to his work, good work. I knew that because I read a few things he'd written at that time, including Mambo Kings. Or no, not yet, that wasn't published yet, but I read something else. And so I went back to New York, and there was a phone call. Not long after our Sundance introduction. And he invited me, and he said, I want you to meet Laurie. So I invited my wife, Nan, and the four of us had dinner. And what was evident to me very quickly was that Laurie, though she was with a very private man, as has already been said, wanted this man and what she knew about him in the intimate way, and his charm and his interior soul, his very spiritual nature. She wanted others to know that. She wanted this to be shared over a dinner table in our case. And this is how my relationship began with the two of them. And I now think with such gratitude upon Laurie for having introduced me to her, Oscar Hijuelos. She told me not long before he died, maybe the weeks before he died, he was reading and enjoying a book entitled Hermits. And he was hermetic. He was, as we all know from what we heard. But he was also, and I think thanks to Laurie, a very personable, engaging, outward-looking man who could, under proper circumstances, be what most writers are not, which is to say well-liked and well-understood. And for this, I'm greatly indebted forever to Laurie. Thank you.
At the New York City Landmarks 50 Alliance, thank you, are indebted to Deborah not only because of her mechanical skills, but her great competence, courtesy, and always good cheer. Thank you for all that you do, Deborah. And now you add technical assistant to the list. And we are also indebted to Simeon Bankoff. You come forward, please. Simeon Bankoff is the executive director of the Historic Districts Council. New York City has 120 historic districts, and I would venture the guess that many of you live in in an historic district and can be reminded when you return home by seeing handsome terracotta black and white signs designed like almost everything we do pro bono by Massimo Vignelli, the internationally acclaimed designer, that indicates where you live. But today, we are going to devote a cultural medallion. Some of you may know that they are porcelainized enamel plaques affixed to the exterior of buildings throughout New York City. There are about 120 of them now, to commemorate an individual or an occurrence that has made a significant contribution to New York City's rich cultural heritage and to create a sense of pride in our history. Most of these people are nominated for inclusion by members of the public, and we would like you to do the same. To learn more about our programs and to find the form where you nominate someone, please see our website, HLPC, And if you'd like to learn about the New York City Landmarks 50 Alliance, please see New York City Landmarks 50 Alliance.org that has a very informative website, including the work of the 126 member organizations. We will now dedicate this cultural medallion to the accomplishments of Oscar Hijuelos, and Simeon Bankoff will unveil and read the text. But before that, thanks to each of you and all of you for joining us today, and thank you for your patience in waiting for our usual on-time ceremonies to begin. You are hardy souls, and we appreciate and admire that. And here now, Simeon will read the medallion celebrating the life and work of Oscar Hijuelos, here where history happened.
Oscar Jerome Hijuelos, August 24th, 1951 to October 12th, 2013, 419 West 118th Street, Manhattan. The son of Cuban immigrants, Oscar Hijuelos lived here from 1951 to 1971, where he first began to write and play guitar and piano. Literature and high winds. Literature and music would become his lifelong passions. A student at Bronx Community College, Manhattan Community College, and Lehman College before entering the City College of New York, where he received his BA and MFA, he was the recipient of the Rome Prize for his first novel, The House in the Last World, 1983. Hijuelos became the first Latino to win the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1990 for The Mambo Kings Play Songs of Love, 1989. He explored the immigrant experience and celebrated the Morningside Heights neighborhood in The Mambo Kings, which was adapted as a film in 1992 and a musical in 2005. In 1998, he married writer and editor Laurie Marie Carlson.